Okay, so vol-wise, so we did have a repricing of realized, but I mean, considering how much we've rallied, realized has only gone up 10 points. So you've seen this move here on realized, and that's just because the moves have just been so steady. So it hasn't been like an 8 to 10% up in a day. It's been 2, 3, 4%, but it just comes every single day. And we find ourselves up nearly 20% in a week. So realized has kind of been an orderly move higher. Now, because we've moved in a straight line, that has created this explosion in implied vol, because that's based on flows, right? As we just broke the level and just kept on going, that has sucked in call buyers, and the call buyers obviously option buyers. Option buyers are going to drive implied vol higher, basically, right? So that's why we saw a big uplift in implied volatilities, and we're talking about 10 to 15 vols in the front end of the curve there. That's taken volatility carry back to positive. So you're looking at 10 to 12 vols positive, because those implies have really caught a big bid and realized hasn't actually gone that much higher. So the break higher, in Bitcoin was enough to get the whole space moving. It definitely triggered short covering in Ethereum calls, which we were calling for would likely happen if we broke certain levels. And then the new flow has kind of taken Ethereum dealers away from long gamma into flattish gamma territory now. So that has kind of stopped putting a lid on Ethereum prices. So we do think Ethereum in the super short term is the one that could easily knee jerk up towards 3,000, and Bitcoin could still sit around 5,000 in the near term. I still think it goes a lot higher, but I'm just thinking in the super short term, I could see that set up. Now we are short gamma here though in Bitcoin. That does explain why there's such high vol carry. Usually when dealers are short gamma, they're not going to cool the vol down massively and then just get lifted out of more and more gamma. So it makes sense that they're going to call the vol more expensive relative to realize, and they're going to earn their money through time decay. That's a way of protecting themselves from getting lifted out of more optionality. So, if realize does settle back down into the 30s over the next week, then we probably have got a lot of room for implieds to fall. So maybe they will retrace a bit, but we need to see that realized go back down, and we need to see markets kind of finding a new range. It's a little bit early to call that right now. Now on CPI, we did see the market pull back a touch, but it's not convincing. I mean, I think the dip got bought pretty fast. So I'm not sure it's going to turn into a material sell-off. I mean, equities are a little bit heavier than Bitcoin, I think, vol adjusted. So yeah, I would expect equities maybe to pull back a bit, but I think crypto's decorrelating from equities. And I think crypto is really being driven by these flows. And whilst these flows are relentlessly coming through the door, you probably don't want to fight it and get in the way of crypto right now. Yeah. Okay. Term structure, you can see shifting up pretty dramatically here. Bitcoin, that pretty much the whole curve shifting. Ethereum, the front end shifting more. So Ethereum's a bit more of a normal vol spike where that front end was up like 20 odd points, back end only up 2. Whereas if you look at the likes of Bitcoin, front end was up sort of 15, but the back end was up 5 or 6 as well. So the fact that the back end is going up so much is a function of the fact that call buyers are coming in the longer maturities, right? Which is interesting because they're basically saying, well, we don't know about the short term, but we are absolutely convinced that longer term, this thing wants to fly. And by those expiries in June was where there was a lot of calls bought. And by that expiry, the halving is done and dusted. And you should have got, if you're going to get a big re-rating and this whole supply demand shock I'm talking about, then that is kind of played out by June most likely. So I think that's why people are piling in to June upside. And they're also just rolling up strikes, but we'll talk about that when we go to the flows. Okay, so that's kind of what we are seeing in term structure. The vol spread, you can see the front end of it has popped. So we went from sort of 0 to 5 or 6, maybe 7 vols. You can see that here as well. Now, front end Ethereum obviously accelerating on that break of 2,500. I think because the short calls are all getting covered, so that gave it more of a bid because it kind of exaggerated it. You've got call buyers chasing, but you also got short covering. So like a double whammy. There probably wasn't quite as much short calls out there in Bitcoin, which is why the front end Ethereum caught a bid. The realized vol spread is still positive. You can see that here in those dotted lines. Even though Bitcoin was leading the charge initially, Ethereum kind of came back with a big move. So realized hanging in there. The spot spread, as we said, was trading all week. initially testing that 0.051 level, bouncing 6% off there in the last 48 hours. The short-dated call buying in Ethereum does suggest that traders are looking for a 3,000 level. I certainly am. And whilst I think 50K on Bitcoin could provide some resistance, we've seen some on-chain data suggesting that the average level of a lot of purchases around that 50K area. So is that going to give people a chance to maybe offload or take some chips off the table? Who knows? But that is what the on-chain data may be suggesting. And then I do see massive potential for Ethereum on the back of continued innovation and development in the ecosystem. The added kicker of the potential ETF approval by the summer. And that's why medium-term upside, I think, makes a lot of sense. June to December, particularly in Ethereum. But I'm sure Bitcoin will work too. But I just think Ethereum's still got a catch up in it. And at some point, we may see that. And if we go back to past cycles, when Ethereum wants to catch a bid, wants to catch up, and it's an Ethereum narrative driving things, it can leave Bitcoin in the dust, right? And so I want to be pre-positioned for that if I think that is a scenario that could actually play out. Yeah. Okay, so then moving on to skew. You can see here, cool skew very much coming back. That's this drop here. As we go down, that means we're moving from put skew back towards call skew. It's getting pretty inflated. We're looking at about 6 vols across the entire curve, 6 to 7 vols back in call skew. That's on both assets. We think, call skew in the short-term expiries might come under pressure quickly as call overwriters might be enticed back in. Also, you might get some profit taking if spot stops breaking out and kind of chills out at 50K for a bit. People might throw in the towel and take some profit on calls that they've been long. The call overwriters in Ethereum have been burnt though, once again, as they're short covering. So there might be a more persistent bid for Ethereum upside as that supply has been reduced. Now, this is just a theory. It remains to be seen. I think, if we get 1 week of stability in price where we kind of plus or minus 100 points on Ethereum, then if that entices the call sellers back in, then maybe we're going to go back to where we were in terms of vol, and that bid won't be persistent. But I think we need to kind of wait and see how that plays out, see if these guys are licking their wounds or if they're very quick on the trigger finger again to sell calls. But it's a bit early to make that call right now. Okay, looking at the dashboard, obviously we've moved into sell call territory. So if you have got bullets to sell calls, it's as good a time as any in terms of just pure sort of overwriting. But like I say, I think that we are at this point where we could see some seriously parabolic price action in Bitcoin, and breaking through 50K is a big psychological level. And like I said, just the supply demand imbalance is so much right now that I don't think you really want to stand in the face of it, and you don't want to be too cute to nick that little bit of extra yield selling calls when you might actually miss out on on like a 40-50% rally in the next couple of months. And I think you'll be kicking yourself if you did that, basically, right? So I'm not launching loads of calls right now. I did take profit on a few Ethereum calls, which we'll talk about in a bit. But certainly I'm very much leaning long space, and I plan to continue that way. Okay, look, specifics on the flows. You can see volume spiked by about 60% on Bitcoin, lots of short covering and opportunistic call buying. The large clips came in the 60 to 75K region. That's here in the April to June buckets. Approximately $9 million of premium got spent on those long dated calls. Apparently that's about 400K of Vega, which is why that vol curve shifted up so much. That's a pretty big chunk of Vega. And they did sell some in the money calls as well. So we suspect that's someone who's done really well, got loads of in the money June calls and wants to roll them up and get more bang for their buck if the rally continues, basically, right? So we think that's what's going on there. And that's certainly what a professional options trader would do, who had some deep in the money calls, but remained bullish and saw a lot of signs that the rally was going to continue. You would be parking your premium in something that gets you much more leverage. And that looks to be like what they've been doing. Okay, Ethereum flows were pretty flat on the week. There was a bit of an influx coming in the last couple of days. Once again, all call dominated. We saw some short covering in these closer to the money calls. We saw a load of buying of these outrights in the 2,600 to 3,000 strikes in February and March. That's where people are going after it right now to get the leverage. We saw some April calls also being sold. That's this red one here. These are basically part of calendar structures that traded. where people are buying March calls and selling April. I don't know if that's an overwrite, a rolling up exposure to just kind of reduce the gamma exposure that they have. That might be what they're doing there, or it might be just an opportunistic way to kind of get some gamma on the book, but not be long loads of Vega now that vols have spiked. Yeah. So that's kind of the flows that are dominating in Ethereum. Right. How's that translating through to gamma positioning? Well, we can see gamma positioning here. We've got Bitcoin kind of tanking back down towards the low end of the range in terms of gamma. The massive strike here is the 50K strike. You can see the expiries are this Friday, next Friday, and then March expiry. So that's where the majority of those 50K short strikes are. We do have short strikes around there at 48K and also at 52K. So it basically tells us that Bitcoin is going to stay in short gamma territory for some time, it looks like, wherever we go. It's probably going to keep Bitcoin relatively choppy. Ethereum dealer gamma did collapse as well. You can see it collapse. It hasn't gone into short territory, but it's gone to neutral, which for Ethereum is effectively, as good as being short, because it means Ethereum is free to move around and exhibit its kind of more higher beta nature that it can have. You can see the strike concentration. The shorts are definitely February shorts in the kind of 26 to 2800 region, whereas we've got long strikes down here at 25 and below 2400. So if Ethereum was to pull back to 2400, we'd go to a zone where people are long gamma again. That would probably slow the move down and provide some support. So not only do we get technical support at 24, 25, we get gamma based support there as well. If we continue to break higher, there is no support, and this thing could fly to 3000 quite easily and quite quickly. So that's what the gamma setup is basically telling us. Again, another reason to be fairly optimistic that a move to 3K is quite likely and on the cards. That's the summary for this week in crypto. Thanks a lot. As always, I'll catch you guys later.